He was done with wars. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. But on that particular Tuesday morning, as he watched the kid in the red hoodie shove an old woman to the ground for a plastic grocery bag, something inside him cracked. Loud, not violent. Just a quiet, almost surgical snap. The kind of silence that only men who've been trained to kill can truly hear. His name was Jack Murdock. Age, 65. Occupation, retired Master Sergeant, U.S. Army. Service years, 1978 to 2012. Current location, El Paso. Texas population, 680,000. And somehow, every single one of them seemed to be looking the other way. Jack had moved to El Paso for peace. For dry air, low taxes, and a porch that creaked when you sat on it. Instead, he got firecrackers at 3 a.m., kids yelling, "Run!" in the alleys, and a city whose spine had been slowly eaten out by fentanyl, fear, and forgotten promises. He didn't mind the noise. He minded the silence of the good people who were too scared to speak, so he watched. For 6 months, he sat on that porch with his coffee, watched the corner boys run product, watched the gangsters mark territory with spray cans and switchblades, watched the police drive by with their eyes down and radios off. But watching had a cost. And on that Tuesday morning, when that old lady hit the ground and no one moved, not a single person, Jack stood up and the war came back to him like it had never left. Asterisk, the streets didn't look like war zones. Not at first glance, no tanks, no sirens, just cracked sidewalks, flickering street lamps, and graffiti that looked more like warnings than art. But Jack had seen enough battlefields to know that chaos didn't always announce itself with explosions. Sometimes it crept in like humidity, slow, sticky, and impossible to shake off. The kid who pushed the woman? Jack had seen him before. Tall, skinny, maybe 17. Called himself Reek. Always hanging around the corner bodega with a group of other boys who looked too tired to be that young. Jack knew their routines better than they did. He had trained his eyes to notice movement, patterns, weak points. The military had burned that habit into him, and like every scar on his body, it never really faded. Later that evening, Jack went back to that same spot on the porch, same chair, same cup. Only this time his old Army-issued notepad sat beside him, a black pen resting on top. He didn't write much, just names, locations, times, arrows, pointing to alleyways. Symbols only. He understood. The type of mapping that would have made any intelligence officer proud and very nervous. Because when a man like Jack Murdock starts taking notes, it means one thing. He's preparing for a different kind of war. That night, the neighborhood sounded louder. Or maybe Jack had just started listening again. He heard a window shatter to houses down. He heard muffled screaming, then silence, then a car door slam. And when the same red-hooded kid walked past his porch with a swagger that dripped of mockery, Jack didn't move. He just stared, eyes locked, still as stone. The kid smirked, pulled a middle finger up slow and deliberate. Jack didn't blink. He didn't have to, because this wasn't a bar fight. It wasn't some Hollywood showdown. This was intelligence gathering. And Jack was the only one in the neighborhood playing the long game. The next morning, Jack paid a visit to the local bodega, the same one the corner kids used like their personal base. "Early for you, Mr. Jack," said Ramon, the owner, an immigrant from Honduras with 3 kids and tired eyes. "Not here for coffee today," Jack said, scanning the dusty shelves and watching the small security monitor in the corner. "I want to know about the kid in the red hoodie." Ramon tensed up instantly. "You don't," he whispered. "He's not from here. Came from New York. They say he's got people behind him." Jack raised an eyebrow. "People," Ramon leaned in, guns, connections. "He works fast. Real fast. Since he showed up, 3 shops closed.
One old man ended up in the hospital. Cops don't even write the reports anymore."
Jack exhaled slowly. He had fought warlords in Kandahar who had better manners that afternoon. Jack opened the trunk of his car. Under the spare tire sat a locked steel box. Inside the box, his old crowbar knife, a military-grade flashlight, and a black and white photo of his platoon. Every man in the photo had a story. Half of them were dead. 2 were in prison, 1 had gone missing in Syria, and yet Jack was still here, in a neighborhood that had forgotten how to fight for itself. He closed the trunk slowly.
Not to be dramatic,
But to remember what it felt like to choose a mission, not be assigned one. This wasn't revenge. This was discipline. This was duty. 3 days later, a note appeared under Reek's bike seat. No signature, no threat, just 3 words. You're being watched. It wasn't meant to scare him. It was meant to unbalance him. Jack knew fear made people stupid. Stupid people made mistakes. That night, Reek left the corner early. That was the first mistake. Jack watched everything unfold like chess. He studied who Reek talked to, who he avoided, followed from a distance on foot, in silence. The kid moved through the blocks like he owned them, but Jack noticed the small things, the way he glanced over his shoulder more often now, the way his right hand twitched near his waist, probably where he tucked a blade, the way he didn't laugh as much with his crew anymore. Paranoia had set in. Jack could smell it, like gun oil and sweat before a firefight. 1 week in the neighborhood started changing. Subtle shifts. The graffiti tags disappeared from a few walls. One night, Jack found a burner phone tossed in a trash can with messages that read, "Old man's watching again. Don't go near his porch. Might be a Fed or something." Jack smiled. He didn't need to carry a badge. Her silence was louder than sirens. His stare, heavier than handcuffs. But he knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. Because there was something else Reek was hiding. Something bigger than just a street hustle. Jack just hadn't seen it yet. But he would. And when he did, this neighborhood would remember what it felt like to have a protector again. Not a cop. Not a vigilante. A soldier. Asterisk, they thought he was just another old man in a leather jacket. A leftover from the past. A man stuck in his routine, talking to shopkeepers, fixing a bike, and feeding stray cats. But that night, when the East Side warehouse exploded into a ball of fire and took out Rico's drug shipment worth millions, the whispers started. They say it wasn't the cops. Cops don't move like that. Someone knew exactly where Rico stored the shipment. I would know that. It was surgical. Military, even. Frank sat at his kitchen table, black coffee in one hand, flipping through a local newspaper like nothing had happened. Behind those pale blue eyes was already 10 steps ahead. 1. The Hunt BG in his Rico wasn't the kind of man to let things slide. His cousin, Manny, had barely returned from checking the burnt warehouse when Rico slammed his fists onto the table. "You're telling me someone walked into my property, planted explosives, and walked out clean?" Manny nodded. "Not even a footprint, Rico. Cameras were dead." Power cut like clockwork. Rico turned toward the dark window. "This ain't no street punk. This is a ghost. I want him." The hunt began. Bounties were whispered in underground bars. Eyes scanned every corner. But Frank had been trained for this. He knew how they moved. He knew how they watched. And more importantly, he knew how to make them watch the wrong things too. Urban. Guys, Frank wasn't planning to take on the whole operation at once. No, that would be suicide. This wasn't a war fought with bullets. It was a war of perception. So he started sending messages. A burner phone left ringing on the hood of Rico's second Gaman's car. Piece of military dog tag with a zip tie placed on a rooftop. A red laser dot flashing briefly across the forehead of one of Rico's smugglers, only to vanish the next second. It wasn't about killing. It was about making them paranoid, making them feel watched, making them afraid to blink. By the third night, Rico's own men were turning on each other. Frank watched from the shadows, calculated, waited, and when they finally made a mistake, he was there to capitalize. 3. A trap of their OW, and they tried. To bait him, word was spread about a false arms deal near a construction site in Brooklyn. Rico's men intentionally left the area poorly guarded. Hoping Frank would bite, he did, but not how they expected. While they waited inside the half-finished building, Frank disabled the main supports from beneath. Not enough to kill, but enough to trap them. Within seconds, the floor gave way, sending 6 of Rico's men crashing into a cement pit above them. Speaker clicked on, distorting Frank's voice into something cold and unrecognizable. "You're playing chess with someone who wrote the damn manual." Then silence. It was the final warning. 4. The police unnotified SEAL Lieutenant Sarah Vega had been tracking gang violence for over a decade. But what was happening lately? It wasn't gang behavior. That was discipline. It was organized chaos. She started putting pieces together. A destroyed warehouse. Rico's men hospitalized without any gunshots fired. The strange reports of a man in his 60s appearing on CCTV just before each incident, always walking with a limp, always looking down, always disappearing into thin air. Frank's name came up once. A vague connection from an old assault. Report when he broke a car thief's wrist with a cane. No charges filed. She visited his building. He opened the door before she knocked. "You looking for trouble, or are you here to stop it?" he asked calmly. "I'm here to understand what's happening on my streets." Frank's eyes narrowed. He said nothing. But for a second, Vega saw something behind that calm exterior. Not just a soldier. It's not just a man, but a force of nature waiting to be unleashed. 5. The RSCKO in Jericho grew desperate. Half his crew either vanished or defected. His products stopped moving. Even his lieutenants started doubting. So he sent a message, a direct one. They grabbed Luis, the teenager from the local garage Frank always helped. They left a note tied to his shirt. "Come alone, 3 a.m., the shipyard, or the kid dies." Frank didn't call the cops. He didn't gear up like in the old days. Walked into the darkness with nothing but his coat, his eyes sharp as a blade. The shipyard was silent, but not empty. Snipers on rooftops, knives in alleyways, guns behind crates. Rico stepped forward. "You're clever, old man. But this ends tonight." Frank cracked his neck and smiled. "No, son. This just begins." The AMBUS is what they didn't know was that Frank had mapped every inch of the shipyard weeks ago. He'd helped to repair a truck there. He knew where the support beams were, where the steel containers stacked up to make blind spots, and where the water lines ran, and he'd left presents. With a click of a remote in his pocket, a blinding flare launched from the rooftop, scattering the snipers. Smoke grenades detonated from the sewers. Chaos reigned. Frank moved like a ghost, disabling, disarming, disappearing by the time Vega's team arrived. All they saw were 20 gangsters zip-tied and gagged, Luis safe and untouched, and Frank leaning against a wall like he was just waiting for a bus. 7. A city takes unnoticed. IC news traveled fast. Unknown vigilante disrupts. Major gang operation. Man in his 60s dismantles criminal network alone, but no name was confirmed. No face caught on camera, just a whisper, and in the heart of the city, people started walking a little safer. Teenagers began fixing up the garage Frank loved. Shopkeepers left extra coffee at his table. Lieutenant Vega visited one last time. "You could have joined us officially. We could use men like you." Frank shook his head. "I don't take orders anymore, but I'll be watching. They say the night is darkest before the dawn." For John Maddox, this wasn't just an old saying. It was a tactical reality. Midnight in the Bronx. The warehouse was dead silent, but John knew it was crawling with life. Not the kind that nurtured or created, but the kind that infected and consumed. Vultures in the form of young men with guns and nothing to lose. He stood across the street, in the shadows, watching the lights flicker through broken panes. Final raid was coming not by the NYPD, but by him. Alone, he adjusted his Kevlar vest, loaded a fresh mag into his Glock, and whispered to himself, "For Marcus. For the block." He had buried too many kids in his mind already. Marcus was the last straw. This warehouse was the heart of the gang's operation, a hub for fentanyl, ghost guns, and stolen tech. He had traced every route, every supply chain, every getaway car. His training in the military had made him lethal in combat. But his time on these streets had made him something more ruthless with purpose. He crossed the street. The doors weren't locked. They weren't expecting anyone crazy enough to come at them alone. But John wasn't just anyone. It was what happened when you pushed a warrior too far. Inside, dim light barely illuminated rows of crates. Two guards slouched by the main hallway, talking trash about something irrelevant. John didn't wait. Two silent shots. One in the neck, one in the eye. Bodies fell like dropped coats. He stepped over them. Room by room, corridor by corridor, John moved like a shadow, precision, patience, and cold efficiency. A third guard got his throat sliced before he could even lift his AR-15. A fourth was knocked out with a blow from John's elbow, then zip-tied to a metal pipe. By the time he reached the main chamber, the alarm had been tripped. A dozen gang members scrambled for their weapons. He kicked over a crate, using it for cover as bullets shattered the air. He rolled left, turned, fired 3 shots, 3 hits. 2 more charged him. One fell before he reached John. The other tackled him to the ground. It was a mistake. John used the kid's momentum against him, flipping him over and slamming his head into the concrete. Blood spurted. Silence returned for a moment. Then came Tyrell, the leader, the one who ordered Marcus's death. "You crazy old man," Tyrell sneered, holding a MAC-10. "What the hell are you?" John rose to his feet, bruised but still, breathing. "I'm the last face you'll ever see." Tyrell fired. The gun sprayed wild. John dove behind a forklift, returned fire. One shot clipped Tyrell's shoulder. He screamed, dropped the weapon. John advanced slowly, gun aimed at the man's forehead. Tyrell begged, "You can't do this, man. You ain't the law." "I'm not the law," John said. "But I'm justice." He pulled the trigger. The warehouse burned. John didn't light it, but he didn't stop it either. Arson was the least of their crimes. When the cops finally arrived, all they found were 20 unconscious or dead gang members and enough evidence to dismantle a multi-state operation. But no sign of John Maddox. He disappeared into the wind. Weeks passed. The Bronx was quieter. Kids started playing basketball again without ducking gunfire. Mothers dared to walk their toddlers down the street. And in a corner coffee shop behind, a newspaper sat a gray-haired man sipping black coffee, watching. He didn't speak much, but his presence said enough. People started whispering. The Reaper's still out there, not as a myth, not as a ghost, but as a man who reminded the streets, there are some veterans you don't mess with.